Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs, go on the road to Austin, Texas, for lack of better terms, dominate that football game against Coach Sark and the Texas Longhorns. And I think what's the conversation you got to have now is just how dangerous is this Georgia program in 2024. And I think what's most exciting for Georgia fans is, hey, look, when you play defense like we saw on Saturday night, you're going to be an extremely dangerous football team. The way we saw Georgia play Saturday night, there ain't going to be many offenses in the country that can move the football consistently on Georgia. But I think what's most exciting is you probably played, Dill, this might be a generous grade, like C football and offense. That might be generous. And you still won by 2 scores on the road against the number 1 team in the country. Look, we've seen Carson Beck play much better football than he's played to start 2024. If Carson Beck gets back to the form that we saw in the 2023 season, this team is probably the number 1 team in the country. Now, I want to start on the defensive side of the football, talk about some guys that stood out, then work to the offense. Now, before we get into it, and as always, to the Georgia fans, let it fly in the comments section. Dill, we're going to start this conversation with just upon the rewatch, like what players really stood out for us for this Georgia team. Probably get 30 names you could talk about. So if we leave a name out, that flash for you guys, let it fly in the comments section. All the support the Georgia fans have shown the boys, been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, without further ado, we got to start with this Georgia defense. Like 259 yards total given up against Texas. Texas averaged less than 4 yards per play. It doesn't get any better. Give me the name that stood out to you the most upon rewatching this football game.
So I'll give you 2. Michael Williams, he's the obvious one. I mean, you talk about playing a dominant football game from start to finish against the run, against the pass, making huge plays. Like, they needed that guy on the defensive line. We've been kind of talking about it. Like, it's like a good defensive line, or it felt like a good defensive line all year, but it wasn't a great smothering defensive line. I think the way Michael Williams played, you'd probably throw Jalen Walker in there too. I thought Michael was a little bit more dominant, but Jalen Walker was sick too. And then another guy is Jonel Aguero. I don't think we've seen him play with that type of speed. Like when the ball went out to the flat, he was there quick, and he was there violently. That targeting call, it's about as brutal of a target as I've seen. I mean, that looked like a really clean physical hit. But the way he was playing, the mentality he was playing with, I think KJ Bolden, I'd probably lump him in too, is those guys, the speed they were playing with, the physicality, that looked like the way they played that second half against Clemson. That looked like the 2021 Georgia defense. It felt a little bit different, frankly, than what we saw against Alabama. And frankly, it's like a Mississippi.
So the emergence, not emergence, but the reemergence, Mikel Williams is massive. Because what were we saying about Georgia? Like, they don't feel like they have those game records on the defensive line that we remember Georgia having going back to 2021 and 2022. You saw those game records, right? Williams, but also Jalen Walker. Dill, you know, to Jonel Aguero, and this, we all know, like, if you're a Georgia fan, you follow this Georgia program, you know how important that star position is to this Georgia defense. Like, there's a lot of responsibility that you have, and you had a really damn good one last year in Tyke Smith. Now you have Jonel Aguero, and this kid committed to Georgia. The Georgia fans who've been rocking with the boys for the last 2 years, remember, like, when this kid committed, we said he is born to play the star for this Georgia defense. He's starting to become that guy. That was massive. Dill, I'll give you 2 what I would think are unsung heroes. You want to start with Warren Brinson. Warren Brinson was freaking awesome. Like, and I don't even know if we mentioned him on the instant reaction on Saturday night, but you go back and rewatch that game. Dill, there was one rep where he just benched out DJ Campbell, snapped him down right to his face in the dirt. Like, DJ Campbell's a really good interior offensive lineman for Texas. Warren Brinson did what he wanted to with DJ Campbell consistently in that football game.
Was an underrated part of that game. You talk, like, I thought Stackhouse played really well too. I think, again, just being able to sit the 2 gap and eat the run up with your front 2 defensive linemen. I mean, not to say, like, obviously Michael was involved, Jalen Walker involved in their ability to play off the edge with guys like Chambliss, also very much involved. But that was, like, again, I don't know that they have absolute killers on the inside, but those 2 then showed, like, well, at least they're just going to take care of the run and eat it up and be tough and be physical in a way that I think is important. Is, like, how Georgia wants to play defense and let their linebackers kind of run free and play more downhill than maybe we've got to see them play at times.
So it was the best performance from the linebacker position as well that we've seen all year, maybe going back to that Clemson game. I don't think it's coincidence that it also coincided with Nazir Stackhouse and Warren Brinson playing their best football game. You go back to the 2021 season when you had Georgia linebackers, one of the freakier linebacker rooms that we can remember in all of college football. Yeah, those linebackers were really freaking good, but you also had just a dominant defensive line playing in front of them, allowing those linebackers to play free, to play downhill. That's kind of what you saw Saturday night for Georgia.
And obviously, you got to talk like the health. I mean, they were just like kind of fully healthy for the most part, and
Yeah,
guys were playing fast again, even against Alabama. It's like you just never felt like you had a healthy, like complete
yeah.
version of that Georgia defense. I think again, you got some guys back, and you saw how much of an impact a very healthy Warren Brinson makes on everyone around him. Because obviously, that position it's been an important one for Georgia, and when those two aren't kind of playing at full strength, it changes things for the Dogs.
And you talk about, so you had like a guy like Christian Miller, who I almost see like Christian Miller as like that Jalen Carter-esque guy. Like, I'm going to be a penetrator. I'm going to be getting behind the backfield and I'm going to be contributing in the pass rush. Then you look at Naz and say, like, Nazir Stackhouse was doing the dirty work. Like, I don't even know if he appeared on the box score. But I mean, you talk about just handling double teams. You talk about winning at the point of attack. Deal that front seven. I mean, 7 sacks, 10 tackles for loss is a ludicrous number against any offensive line. But the crazy part is going into this football game, what was I saying? Foolishly saying, I'm picking Texas's offensive line to win that matchup against this Georgia defensive line. I thought Texas had the best offensive line in the country heading into that matchup. I don't know if there was like a pep talk or whatever it was. That Georgia defensive line felt drastically different from the Georgia defensive line we saw against Mississippi State, from the defensive line we saw against Alabama. If you get that performance from that Georgia front seven the rest of the season, you look, if Texas can't deal with you on the offensive line, I don't know what team in the country can deal with it. And I think secondly, and again, I think it's a relationship there. Like the front seven, the pass rush was dominating. All of a sudden, the secondary starts to play a little bit better too, working vertically down the field. Thought Georgia was pretty good, and you picked up some pass interference calls. That one particular I didn't necessarily agree with, but at the end of the day, Texas, what they're known for is being explosive in the passing attack. They had one completion that traveled 20 plus yards down the field. Georgia was, pretty much able to erase that deeper third threat that we were nervous about Texas executing.
And honestly, the only Texas kind of got in that secondary was throwing the ball a little bit short on deep balls. I mean, those aren't bad cover plays. Like, I hate those plays. I hate seeing them against, like, again, Michigan fan. Like, when you see a team pop it up short and it's like, that's not a football play, and you're just looking to draw a PI or have a guy come back for the ball, DB not looking for it. Like, they're frustrating. But honestly, you can live with those much more than you can live with, I mean, giving up just bombs to teams and giving up 60-yard touchdowns like they did to Ryan Williams. So, again, I think you saw some improvements from the secondary. Again, will that be a great unit for them at the corner spot? I don't think it'll be historically great. I'll just be honest. I thought they played better. They took the football away, and they covered well in that shorter portion of the field. You still want to see them get a little better at tracking the ball and playing it in the air. But I think when their defensive line plays that way, you'll cover up for a lot of the flaws maybe that exist.
If you can initially jump on these wide receivers and you have a pass rush like that, it's going to be really hard for teams to consistently push the ball down the field, because it's just like there's not going to be many offensive lines that can hold up in pass protection long enough for some of these deep developing routes to really hit. And that's what Texas kind of relies on, is they got a really good offensive line, which allows them to run some of those more longer developing route trees down the field. They just didn't have any time to really have those routes develop because this Georgia front seven was just whip and tail up front, for lack of better terms. Now, Dill, I think the fascinating conversation here is there's still a lot of room to grow for this Georgia offense. Let's start with quarterback Carson Beck. And 0 for 2 on throws, 20 plus yards down the field. I think the thing that you want to see Carson Beck clean up the most is, one, a little bit antsy in the pocket still. Like, you can tell Carson Beck is still not super comfortable. Like, and the crazy part is, in 2023, he was an assassin in the pocket. Talk about stepping up, keeping your eyes downfield, and delivering strikes over the middle. he's probably the best in the country last year at attacking the middle of the field. He continues to kind of struggle, and I think the thing you want to see cleaned up the most is one, pocket presence, just being composed in the pocket, and you want to see him get better attacking that short intermediate route tree, that route tree between 10 and 20 yards. He was 3 of 10 on Saturday night. The completion percentage on the season is down 10% from what it was last year. That's kind of how this Georgia offense wants to operate. That's when Carson Beck is at its best. And I know like Ladd and Brock were kind of the two guys that, though those short intermediate route trees, those were his guys. You feel like Carson Beck is still trying to figure that out. But I think at the same token, you need more from these playmakers on the outside in terms of helping Carson Beck out as well.
And that's what I was almost going to get to. Like, he's definitely going to take the brunt, and he certainly deserves his share of the criticism. Yeah. It's a two-man operation, if you will. But you are right. I mean, they don't seem like they're ever on the same, or not ever, just not enough on the same page with each other in terms of who's sitting down in the hole, where the route's supposed to be run, what depth it's supposed to be. Like, all those sort of nuances do feel like, yeah, very surprisingly, I feel like they just haven't quite figured those out. And again, I think all that's trickling down to a very uncomfortable looking Carson Beck, and you see it. I mean, for them to win that game by 2 scores, as you kind of said, well, he throws 3 interceptions is like unbelievable. So I think it shows you where that defense can be. But again, I do think if Georgia's really going to get dangerous, something's got to change about this passing attack. Because, yeah, you like what you saw in the rushing attack, but I don't think you can consistently rely and win this many games if the passing attack doesn't shape up and they don't start getting more consistency and fewer turnovers out of that unit.
I'm kind of surprised you used the word surprisingly, because this was something that we talked about in the offseason where it's not – it might be surprising that it's 7 games into the season and you're still not really seeing it come together. But we kind of knew there would be some growing pains. Like at the end of the day, like Brock and Ladd were his guys. You are throwing to a lot of wide receivers that I don't think Carson Beck has the chemistry that he had with guys like Ladd and Brock. And you can kind of see that. And I think you make a good point, like the trust, like trusting your wide receivers to run the right depth, sit it down when they need to sit it down. You can just tell that last year he was throwing to windows and just trusting Brock and Ladd to go in and be there when they needed to. And most of the time they were. You can tell he doesn't have that trust and these pass catchers yet on the outside. If that part of the offense comes together, I think that's going to be meaningful things. And I think secondly, you saw Georgia get the run game going, which I think excites a lot of Georgia fans. When Carson Beck's at his best, he's working play action. You are manipulating the defense in their eyes when you get that ground game going. Now, play action so far for Georgia wasn't that effective because they've struggled to run the football consistently with their running backs. You kind of saw that, on Saturday against Texas. If you can get that ground game going a little bit more, be able to lean on play action, I do think that would help Carson and probably settle in on this offense. But I mean, Dill, at the end of the day, you kind of just got to trust that Carson Beck is going to figure it out. Like, look, as us Michigan fans, we know dang well because we've seen it. We don't have a quarterback. You know Carson Beck's a good quarterback because you've seen it with your 2 eyes for a whole season in 2023. You've seen it at moments in this 2024 season, but not consistently enough yet. But at least you know you got one. There's so many teams across the country that they just know they don't got a quarterback. Georgia knows they got one. Now they just got to put it together. And I think they're going into a bye week, so they're going to have an opportunity to build on some of that chemistry. And they got a Florida defense coming up that is gettable. And I think if you're Georgia, continue to build that confidence. If Carson Beck turns it on, this team is probably the number 1 team and most dangerous team in the country. We'll close it out there. You got another take, or are you good?
Oh, no, I was just going to say they have a runway to figure it out because I think they got by the one game at this point in the year that really could kind of ruin them or sink them or take away their playoff chance. They beat Texas again. Like, they're going to have tough games for sure. I don't mean to say like they get a cakewalk, but they do have a bit of runway with the bye and then into Florida. So you got a couple weeks to figure it out. But again, I'll kind of continue to say it. I do think that get part of the game at least, and whether they do it off of play action or whether he gets it just rolling straight up from the pocket, I do still think that needs to be figured out before I'm totally ready to be like, oh, Georgia's just going to be a buzzsaw and cutting everyone down. Now, their ceiling is to win a national championship, even if they don't figure it out. But I think it gets a heck of a lot harder to do it in much less.
The margin is significantly smaller if you don't have the offense yet in 2023. But I think the good news is this defense seems to be the dominant Georgia defense that we're looking for, and it's better than it was last year. Like, again, we kind of said it when we opened up the season when they beat Clemson. We said this defense kind of reminds you of the 2021 year. Then you maybe saw some growing pains. I'll say it again, like that version of Georgia's defense kind of reminds you of what you saw in 2021. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.